killing of a judge, calling it a targeted act and a possible case of domestic terrorism.
A former Wisconsin judge is dead. Shot in his home, the judge was zip-tied to a chair and fatally shot.
A 56-year-old male was located in the basement with an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound.
The suspect in the murder of a retired judge, now dead.
Doctors declared douglasuhde legally brain dead Saturday morning, the day after the deadly attack.
An ABC News review of Wisconsin court records found in 2005, 56-year-old Udhe pleaded no contest to armed burglary. Judge Roemer sentenced him to 6 years in state prison.
And authorities now say the suspect had a hit list in his car, including several other public figures.
Others reportedly on his hit list: Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Senator Mitch McConnell, and Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers.
Another man on the hit list is Dan Marcon, who's running for county sheriff in Wisconsin.
Threats and inappropriate communications against federal courts and judges have ballooned to more than 4,500 last year.
Police releasing these images of 49-year-old Pedro Argote, who they say shot Circuit Court Judge Andrew Wilkinson Thursday night outside Wilkinson's house while his wife and son were at home inside. The vicious attack happened just hours after the judge awarded custody of Argote's 4 children to his ex-wife. Wilkinson also denied Argote visitation rights and ordered him to pay child support. Last year, Argote's now ex-wife filed a domestic violence petition against her ex-husband, but it was dismissed 2 weeks later. Police recovered Argote's abandoned vehicle in a wooded area less than 10 miles away from the crime scene.
The hunt for a judge's killer in Hagerstown is over.
The body of suspect Pedro Argote was found by a search team in some thick woods today. It was within a mile of where his car was found in the wake of the shocking killing of Maryland Circuit Court Judge Andrew Wilkinson.
So the body was found in what he described as extremely heavy brush and woods between Clear Spring Road and Bottom Road. After the initial urgent searches looking for evidence when they came across the body, it was on private property that's used for deer hunting. The discovery of Argote's body again puts an end to the manhunt, but does not put an end into the questions about judicial security.
Judge Wilkinson is the 3rd state judge nationally in the last 3 years shot by someone who had a case before their court. And in the last 2 years, there have been more than 7,000 threats against federal judges. New Jersey federal judge Esther Salas has been calling for more judicial security ever since her son was murdered 3 years ago by a man who was targeting her.
Salutations, Serene Eminence here. It's a pleasure to officially reconvene with the Judgeship execution subsector of the Courthouse Homicides series. Assure to tune in to the Murdoch Murders upload, starring the master of mayhem and ostensible opportunist, Alec Murdoch, which was a detailed detour that we traversed through prior to unearthing the current coupling of slain circuit court judges. This is the Vocational Volatility channel's 5th Judgeship Executions episode. Analogous to the 2 circuit court judgeship assassinations to be addressed via today's video, the initial series episode involved the conspiratorial execution of a circuit court judge and his wife, both casualties plotted into motion by the mayor and the mafia. The ensuing episode shall officially bring us to the conclusion of the Courthouse Homicides series, wherein we shall be covering a most dismally dismaying case wherein a U.S. District Court judge's son was murdered by an attorney posing as a delivery man, of whom in actuality intended to execute her. Throughout the tragic trajectory of the Courthouse Homicide series, 3 judges have been slain, 2 within the supposed safe haven of the courtroom quarters, and 1 inside of the supposed refuge of his very own residence. Respective to today's case lineup, we shall be delving into the targeted attacks of 2 circuit court judges, which sadly left them deceased upon the premises of their very own dwellings, and the ashamed assailants themselves self-annihilated. With all of the aforementioned executions in mind, it is eerily evident that the role of judgeship is under siege for a myriad of reasons. which ultimately calls for structural reformation and newfound policy implementation in an effort to preemptively protect the lives of all federal and state judges throughout the United States and beyond. Before we take a deep dive into the harrowing hazards of judgeship, let's blissfully uncork a blessed bottle of 2021 Navigator Rosé. Conscientiously curated with the highest expressions in mind, the winemaking process elegantly focuses on blending so that the consumer may navigate seamlessly through endless layers of exquisite depth and exceptional complexity. Most aligned with our luscious libation of choice, our navigational itinerary is filled to the brim, which chronologically includes the life-threatening aspects of judgeship, the death and legacy of retired Judge Johnroemer, the motive of Defendant douglasuhde, how frustrations with the failings of the justice system leads to targeted attacks on judicial officials, the Pelican brief film reference, the death and legacy of Judge Andrew Wilkinson, the motive of Defendant Pedro Argote, Serene Eminence insights regarding the spirit of oppression respective to the collective consciousness, and the Edge of Tomorrow Live, Die, Repeat film reference. Now let's further explore the life-threatening aspects of judgeship via the examination of real-life case studies. Please know that we shall delve more into judgeship protection protocols and the implementation of related legislation as this episode develops and in the concluding episode to come.
A live look at the U.S. Capitol as we see increased security ahead of a potentially volatile month.
Death threat against a federal judge. FBI agents have arrested a woman in Texas for allegedly making death threats against the judge overseeing former President Trump's special master request.
Abigail Jo Schrei is accused of calling the chambers of Judge Tanya Chutkan on August 5th.
Investigators say the suspect admitted that she left a series of threatening voicemails for the judge. In those voicemails, she allegedly claimed to be Trump's hitman. She told the judge she was marked for assassination and said she was going to personally shoot the judge in front of her family. The suspect is now facing charges of influencing a federal official by threat and making interstate threats to kidnap or injure. Federal prosecutors say the suspect has a history of what they call delusional conduct.
She allegedly left a voicemail threatening to kill anyone who went after Trump and said she'd kill herself if Trump doesn't get elected in 2024. Schrei allegedly also made a threat to kill Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, all Democrats in Washington.
She previously made threats against other public officials, including the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Mr. Trump himself. They're requesting a mental exam to see whether she's competent to stand trial.
Is 2 Harris County judges targeted by threats, but just how often does this happen?
Ron, what we found were so-called security incidents are actually dropping at courthouses across Texas, but threats to court employees, well, they're up. Now take a look at this. These figures come from Texas's Office of Court Administration. During the last 3 years, those security incidents dropped by 38%. That includes things like bomb threats, attempting to take weapons into court, and assaults on workers. But while overall incidents are down, threats are rising. From 18 in 2014 down to 5, but then up to 21 last year. And the state tells us something else. Those threat numbers, well, they're not complete. You may remember in the 2 recent Harris County cases, the judges received the threats when they were at home. Well, it turns out the state's numbers only include incidents that happen in or around courthouses. So what's behind this rise in threats? A spokesperson for the Office of Court Administration pointed to the 2015 shooting of a judge in Austin. The agency believes that increased awareness and the need to report threats. Now, just this year, state lawmakers passed a new courthouse security act aimed at better protecting judges, and lawmakers increased the penalties if someone's convicted of threatening a judge.
There's also growing calls for increased protection for judges across the country. This after a threat already against Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh.
FBI agents scouring the home of 26-year-old Nicholas Roski, who's behind bars on attempted murder charges after police say he threatened to kill Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. He showed up at Kavanaugh's home around 1 a.m. Wednesday, then called 911 saying he had a gun on him and wanted to kill a specific Supreme Court justice because he was upset about the Uvalde school shooting and that leaked draft of a Supreme Court opinion that could overturn Roe v. Wade.
Obviously, it's behavior that we will not tolerate. Threats of violence and actual violence against the justices, of course, strike at the heart of our democracy.
Somebody shot Judge Julie Kasurik outside of her West Austin home last month. Unsealed search warrants also revealed Travis County DA investigators were warned that person of interest, Jermine Onyere, made a murder threat against a judge.
Documents just unsealed today show someone called the Travis County DA's office, saying they heard Onyere and another man talking about Onyere's plans to kill a Travis County judge. But the search warrant says investigators couldn't verify the tip because they couldn't figure out which judge, and they couldn't find a current case in Travis County involving Onyere.
The U.S. Marshals say last year alone there were 4,500 threats and inappropriate communications against people protected by U.S. Marshals, like federal judges and prosecutors. Back in 2020, a disgruntled lawyer posing as a delivery man went to federal judge Esther Salas's New Jersey home, shot her husband, and killed her son. Since then, she's been pushing legislators to pass a bill that would limit access of public officials' private information, but right now it's stalled in Congress.
What we're asking is that we protect our personal information, our home addresses, our social security numbers. This is what the shooter did in my case.
What is the locket, the picture you have on your necklace?
That is something I sort of wear often. It's Daniel's picture, and when you turn it around, it says, "Let's keep talking, Mom. I love talking to you."
His last words to you.
Yep.
You told me that you and Mark are still trying to come to terms with this, of course.
Of course.
I asked if it had a chilling effect on you. What about on judges in general? Is this intimidating judges?
You know, I think that most of my colleagues, we take an oath. We'll do our job because that's the right thing to do. So I believe that we will continue to do our job, that we won't be scared. But I do believe we need help. I do believe our government has a duty to act, to protect us any way they can in this respect. Look, can we avoid someone doing what was done to my family? I don't know. But can we just sit back and do nothing?
Why do you think the threats against judges are intensifying and increasing?
You know, I think there are a myriad of reasons why it's happening, and I always say it's happening, so let's do something about it. But there is just so much hatred. There's just so much intolerance. There's just so much anger. And I think, you know, we have to realize that it's out there now.
You are out of your courtroom now because of the COVID pandemic. But when you are able to come back in here, are you going to approach that seat differently?
I think I'm going to strive to be the best judge that I possibly can be on a daily basis.
Has this event, has this murder had repercussions through the legal, the judicial community? Like young law students, anybody come to you and say, after this, I'm not sure I want to do this?
I have a good friend of mine. Her daughter is considering the law, a Latina. And she said in a lot of ways, you know, she had reservations. That's one of the reasons I want to come back on the bench. I think it's important for us as a society to send the message that we're not going to tolerate these acts of violence, these threats. We're not going to tolerate that. There will be repercussions.
A chief judge told Maryland lawmakers there were 7 threats against Maryland judges last year alone. The I-Team and reporter Ted Oberg spent the day trying to figure out how serious the threat against judges is, and the results are disturbing. Ted?
Yeah, Leon and Erica, they are. We know this is not unique. According to the National Center for State Courts, this is the 3rd targeted shooting of a state judge in the last 3 years. And information gathered by the I-Team today reveals in this country, judges and court officials are threatened multiple times every day. You'll remember a few of the high-profile instances. Last year, a man was arrested and charged with attempted murder near Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh's Chevy Chase home. In 2020, a man killed a judge's son at their home in New Jersey. At the time, Daniel Anderl was a student here at Catholic University. And proving this has gone on for a long time, in 1989, someone sent a pipe bomb to a judge right there in Hagerstown. It exploded in his apartment, but Judge John Quarterman survived. There are no national statistics tracking threats on state judges. Only a few states actually do it. But in the last few years, you can see what's happened to threats against federal judges and court personnel. They're up 9 times from 2015 to 2021. That spike coincides with the heightened political rhetoric during former President Trump's time in office. Last year, those threats went way down, but they're still multiples of what they were in 2016. Following today's killing in Hagerstown, the Conference of Chief Justices and Conference of State Court Administrators issued a statement in part reading, "The assassination of Judge Wilkinson should be shocking to all Americans. Unfortunately, we fear it's not," the statement said. The sustained attacks in recent years on the rule of law, public institutions of government, and the courts are now having their effects, and we ask all Americans to think carefully about this troubling trend. Congress, by the way, passed a federal law shielding the home addresses of federal judges online just last year. The Center for State Courts says only New Jersey and Oklahoma have done that for state judges. We were able to find Judge Wilkinson's home address on a search engine in seconds. A version of that shielding law in Maryland passed the state Senate last year, but could not get out of committee in the House.
Eminence. Insights. It's essential to note that volatility exists in every realm of reality. It's simply expressed to differential degrees along the metaphysical spectrum. And in this worldly realm of reality, it's typically inconspicuously hidden at the heights and conspicuously demonized at the depths.
This building behind me is the Old County Courthouse. This is where Judge John Roemer started his career as a public defender. And then for the next few decades, he worked with many county employees. And they walked out of this building so that they could see this flag being lowered at half-staff at the request of the county board chairman, who wanted to honor the late Judge John Roemer. And we saw those county employees hugging one another and sobbing over his sudden loss. And this is such a small town, and we often hear the cliche, it's a tight, close-knit community. I mean, that couldn't be any more truer when you're talking about this area. Everyone seems to know everyone. And when I spoke with a woman who knew him and his family, she couldn't get words out before she started crying and told me that it was just too emotional for her. Nothing like this happens in this kind of town. The county board chairman told me that he was a police officer for 27 years. He can only remember 5 homicides in those 27 years.
It honored me too.
Judge Roemer retired in 2017. Timothy Cottingham, a Juneau County Board chairman who worked with Judge Roemer for close to 30 years, says the legal community is still in shock.
I think that's part of the healing process. It's going to take time, like with everything. A lot of people have dealt with him, personally, professionally. It's tough. He was a very good man. The community, I think, is mainly a little bit in shock, the disbelief that something like this could happen here, but also to Judge Roemer.
Juneau County Board Chairman Tim Cottingham takes us to the place where Judge John Roemer was famously known.
He worked in this building and in the new Justice Center.
Cottingham had worked in local law enforcement, as for decades he saw Roemer serve as public defender, assistant district attorney, and circuit court judge.
When he became judge, it was just, kind of like you might want to say icing on the cake. He had a long, great career. He had a great legal mind, and he was friends with all the officers. You could talk to him, and it was personable. It wasn't just professional. The community we're going to dearly miss him.
Beloved during his time in the courthouse, Roemer is remembered beyond it.
Wisconsin Supreme Court Chief Justice Annette Kingsland Ziegler is sharing memories of Judge Roemer tonight. She tells us in part he was known by colleagues for his sharp legal mind and his willingness to share his time and knowledge with others. His work made a tremendous difference in the lives of many people in Juneau County and elsewhere in the state.
In Mauston today, speaking to Judge Roemer's close friends as they work to make sense of this tragedy.
Judge John Roemer was known as Jack here in Mauston. His church community shared with me that he was a humble man and always put others before him.
We also come before you as we are grieved by the death of our brother in Christ and President John Roemer.
This was Judge Roemer's second home.
Became our president of our congregation. Jack had a wonderful sense of humor besides, but he was a very generous, kind, non-judgmental.
Judge John Roemer, also known here as Jack, was sitting in these pews just last Sunday. His sudden death has been a shock to this congregation at St. Paul's Evangelical Lutheran Church in Mauston.
It was, and still is, very numbing to imagine that this happened in our little town, but to a very close friend.
Randy Marshall was a neighbor and went to church with Judge Roemer for decades.
I know people, when they had hard times, he was there for them.
Randy now hoping he can be the same for Judge Roemer's 3 kids that he leaves behind. After learning one of his sons was present during the attack, he immediately checked in.
I was just so happy that he got out the window, and I know that would have been Jack's biggest concern with his son getting out. He says his brother's doing well, and he definitely is doing well too, again, with their faith.
Leaning on faith as they grieve.
At first I was frustrated, but talking with Jack, we always talked. And he goes, I know where I'm going to be, and that's always a better place.
How are area judges telling you they feel right now?
Well, Brad, I spoke to Marathon County Judge Michael Moran here at the Marathon County Courthouse, and he tells me this incident hits even closer to home for him as he knew the victim, Judge John Roemer, personally. He tells me this incident has him concerned.
Judge Roemer was someone that many of us knew and respected. It is a scary thing that this kind of thing is happening this day and age.
Judge Michael Moran says he feels safe inside the courthouse, but once he leaves, it's a different story.
All those different types of cases involve people who are unhappy, and we hope that as judges, instead of resolving their issues through violence or through other means, we have a forum for people to be able to resolve their cases in a way that doesn't involve that.
But he says in this day and age, you can't plan for everything.
I just hope that people realize that we're all just trying to do our jobs, and the people like Judge Roemer, who are dedicated public servants, we're really just doing his job, and I hope that people realize that and understand that.
And he says if you see or hear something, say something.
If you see somebody who's going through a tough time that's making threats or saying anything, just please let people know.
People who worked with the former judge are sharing their memories, some saying he was an inspiration to many.
The devastation to this community is unbelievable.
It's a loss friends and colleagues of former Judge John Roemer are trying to grapple with.
Juneau County is such a tight-knit community. On my heart, I can't even imagine poor Sheriff Olson having to walk in and seeing his friend Jack like that.
As a local reporter, Eva Marie Woywood sat in Judge Roemer's courtroom on a weekly basis.
He treated everyone in his courtroom with so much respect. I mean, all those years, and here Judge Roemer, I mean, he's been retired to be with his wife who was dying. I can't get the image out of my head of him zip tied to a chair, and my heart goes out to everybody.
This, as I mentioned before, does appear to be a targeted act, and the individual who's the suspect appears to have had other targets as well. It appears to be related to the judicial system.
And while this is an isolated incident, police saying that there's no risk to anybody beyond Judge Roemer, the reality is this fits into this greater threat landscape we've been talking a lot about. Frederica, federal officials have been warning for many months now about anti-government sentiment and this heightened threat landscape. And so law enforcement around the country certainly watching this case because it exemplifies a real fear of someone trying to carry out a grievance against a highly visible figure, a judge, a former judge, and actually committing to that act of violence. Again, something law enforcement is particularly concerned about.
A former judge is now dead, targeted in a bizarre plot to kill government officials. Former Juneau County Circuit Court Judge John Roemer was gunned down in his home on Friday.
RP states his neighbor's son from across the street is banging on the door stating that someone murdered his father.
At 6:30 a.m., the Juneau County Sheriff's Office received a call about an armed person. 2 shots fired inside a home in New Lisbon, Wisconsin. They responded, and for nearly 4 hours tried to negotiate with a suspect inside the home before entering and finding 68-year-old retired Judge John Roemer zip-tied to a chair. According to 2 sources familiar with the investigation, police say he was shot and killed.
Some is saying that he woke up, saw a male subject with a firearm pistol, but the subject did not see him and he was able to exit the house through a window.
Police found the suspected attacker injured in the basement from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Police say that man is 56-year-old Douglas Udhe. According to documents found by ABC News, back in 2005, Judge Roemer sentenced Udhe to 6 years in state prison after Udhe pleaded no contest to armed burglary.
The suspect in the shooting has criminal convictions dating back to at least 2002 and has crossed paths with Judge Roemer in the past. Court records show in 2005, his case involving armed burglary and firearms charges came before the judge, who sentenced him to 6 years in prison, followed by 9 years extended supervision. The suspect also brought a civil suit against several law enforcement officials after his 2001 arrest. Judge Roemer was targeted along with other political leaders.
Given his criminal history, should he have been able to purchase firearms legally?
My understanding is that he was prohibited from legally possessing a firearm based on having been convicted of a felony.
Attorney General Josh called Wednesday in a taping for Upfront. The Justice Department says doctors removed 56-year-old Douglas Udhe from life support Tuesday. Investigators saying he shot himself Friday after shooting and killing the retired judge.
Do you know how he obtained this firearm yet?
We're investigating that issue. It's part of what we're looking into, and as we can provide additional information, we will.
What type of gun was it?
I'm not commenting further yet on issues that haven't been provided publicly.
Udhe has a lengthy criminal past and believed ties to several other states beyond Wisconsin, including Michigan and potentially Kentucky.
Is that flat across the board, no matter what state he may have purchased this in or how he acquired it, he shouldn't have had it?
Well, each states have different laws, but there are also federal laws that prevent felons from possessing firearms. And so, you know, how that played out in a particular state would depend on state law, but the federal law would still apply.
In Wisconsin, for example, not all gun purchases require a background check, now part of a heated debate both across the state and country.
Matt joining us once again. Now, law enforcement sources say a hit list with 13 names on it was also found in their investigation. Are officials revealing any new details about that?
Others reportedly on his hit list, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Senator Mitch McConnell, and Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers.
It makes me feel ill that somebody that devoted his life, or a good share of his life, being a jurist in the state, you know, in rural Wisconsin, and that's hard work, to be targeted like that. It makes me, frankly, sick to my stomach.
One of the names on the suspected gunman's list that was left at the crime scene of the killing of a former Juneau County judge included area business owner Dan Marcon. Now, he spoke exclusively with our Madison affiliate today. Take a listen.
We found a list with your name on it, and I'm like, okay, that doesn't sound good.
Dan Marcon says he was shocked when Department of Justice officials informed him his name was on the suspected gunman's list. A high-level law enforcement source tells 27 News former Juneau County Judge John Roemer was on this list, and Friday he was found zip-tied to a chair and fatally shot in his home.
At this point, we are not aware of any evidence indicating that there is any active danger to other individuals. Those who may have been other targets have been notified of that.
I put all my team on alert here at my office or at my shop. I'm run for a county sheriff's seat here locally.
Marcon is running for Chippewa County Sheriff, has worked in the Department of Corrections, and owns a gun store, and says this isn't the first time he's been targeted.
I had a death threat last year from a gentleman in Milwaukee on a stance that I stood with Ron Johnson on. And it was a legit one.
13 names are on that list, including Governor Tony Evers. And right now, authorities are working to determine any connections. Meanwhile, Marcon says he's left looking over his shoulder.
Was there another person that's coming after me that they don't know about?
Marcon says the DOJ has given him few answers, and now he's left with worrying questions.
Who's he affiliated with? Who was he running with?
While this is an isolated incident, police saying that there's no risk to anybody beyond Judge Roemer, the reality is this fits into this greater threat landscape we've been talking a lot about. Frederica, federal officials have been warning for many months now about anti-government sentiment and this heightened threat landscape. And so law enforcement around the country certainly watching this case because it exemplifies a real fear of someone trying to carry out a grievance against a highly visible figure, a judge, a former judge, and actually committing to that act of violence. Again, something law enforcement is particularly concerned about.
Those threats and attacks have brought judicial safety to the forefront.
One former state Supreme Court justice says today's political divisiveness may be partially to blame.
Now, former state Supreme Court Justice Janine Geske says she's had her own scary stories over the years. She's afraid judges are now being swept up in political fights, putting them in danger.
They are the people who make some of the most important decisions, determining the fates of those who sit in their courtrooms.
The judiciary is becoming more and more important rather than less important.
But in recent days, incidents have shown how judges' lives are being put in danger. Last week, a retired Juneau County judge was killed. Wednesday, an armed man was arrested near a U.S. Supreme Court justice's home.
It's scary because there's really very little protection for judges.
Janine Geske is a former state Supreme Court justice. She also served for more than a decade as a Milwaukee County judge.
In my career, I had a couple of those where I had police officers sleeping in my living room, and another point where we pulled the kids out of school and got out of the area. It's frightening.
She says while threats have always been there, today's climate may be stoking the flames.
I am concerned that judges are now being swept up into the political partisan fights that are going on, in addition to being criticized for particular opinion.
Wisconsin judges do not get extra security. Safety expert Brian Doro says high-profile people need to have a plan now more than ever.
You have to have target hardening at your work all the way through the course of your day.
Increased focus now on protecting the people who uphold the law.
If people are afraid to take the position, if people don't have faith in those judges, then our system crumbles.
You know, people get caught up in the criminal justice system, and I'm talking about those who have mental issues or anger issues, and it's really the system that they're angry at, right? But the system doesn't have a face. There's no person to attach to the system. So they start looking at the judge. Well, it must be the judge who's the person who's really harming me here, the person who wants to send me to prison, who wants to take away my firearm, who wants to take away my freedom. Or it's the DA, he must be it. Or, and I've experienced this as well, it's the defense attorney. They're the ones who are somehow ruining my life. And it's really their own problems of their own making, but they have no one else to lash out against. I think it's too long for us to have not done something like this, like the legislation they're talking about to protect these public servants in particular.
And sadly, Josh, we are seeing the impacts, the safety implications of this. But I want to ask you also if there are other implications in terms of outcomes, judicial outcomes. Do you believe that there are cases that prosecutors don't pursue because they are afraid for their own safety or their family's safety? Do you think that happens in our criminal justice system?
I don't think it happens that they don't pursue it. I know when I was in the office as a prosecutor, there were times where we certainly took our safety seriously, where we thought about security, where we were trying to make sure that the people involved in a certain type of case, you might be dealing with, a gang case where you know that there's people out there who might be watching you and where you go park your car and where are you headed. Do you head home the same way every single day? But the job has to be done. And that's why, as Judge Ashley was pointing out, that this is kind of, these people are taking on a public servant's job, and there's some courageousness attached to that, to be able to do your job without having those outside factors like fear for your own safety play any role in your decision making.
The Pelican brief film reference. In terms of cinematic contextualization, not all targeted attacks upon officials are confined to individualized disputes related to disdain against the justice system. Some are the result of large-scale conspiratorial plots, such as in the film adaptation of the Pelican brief, wherein two ideologically divergent Supreme Court justices are assassinated. Both murders are committed by a notorious hitman. Justice Rosenberg, a liberal, is killed at his home, while Justice Jensen, a Republican appointed swing voter, is killed inside a movie theater. The circumstances surrounding their deaths, as well as the deaths themselves, shock and confuse a politically divided nation. Despite their status as political inverses, the two slain justices had a single characteristic in common: a history of environmentalism, making it such that their deaths were orchestrated so that their replacements would be appointed by the current right-wing president, who relishes the chance to appoint officials aligned with his desires to shape the future of the country with his ideals in mind. An intrigued law student composes a brief wherein which she suggests that the murders were financially rather than politically motivated, ultimately speculating that the two deaths were related to oil drilling rights that were in a swampland area home to endangered pelicans, hence the Pelican brief. The brief is investigated, published, and the conspiracy is revealed. Many people lose their lives, their jobs, and one self-annihilates. Official FBI investigations commence, and it can be assumed that the president will almost certainly lose his bid for re-election.
An urgent manhunt is underway after a Maryland judge was killed in the driveway of his own home on Thursday. Police are calling it a targeted attack. The judge had presided over the suspect's divorce case earlier in the day.
Yeah, it really is a tragedy, and that was the pervasive thought from all of the statements that we've got from Governor Wes Moore to state legislators to senators as well. It's been nearly 22 hours since this victim was shot, but the search for the killer is continuing at this hour. We want to show you this victim. This is Judge Andrew Wilkinson. He was 52 years old, a family man. Multiple people I've spoken with today say he was a good man, a great judge, and had a heart of service. State Senator Paul Cotterman, who represents this area, says he knew Wilkinson, is sad for his family as well as the county.
It's a tragedy, unimaginable tragedy here for our community, not just our local community here, but really for our state. An attack on a public servant, particularly a judge, is just unimaginable and horrific.
And for the repose of the soul of Judge Wilkinson, and for the gifts of courage, strength, and comfort to his family who mourn his loss, we pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Earlier today, we spoke with Wilkinson's pastor over at the St. Anne Catholic Church, who said that the kind words for the judge have just been pouring in today.
The judge and his family have been longtime members of our parish here. The judge was just a really, really great guy. Apparently had a great sense of humor, was really well respected by his peers in the workplace. It's probably difficult to overstate how painful and horrible and tragic an event like this is.
The 52-year-old was a youth soccer and Little League coach, a member of the Rotary Club. He was appointed to the bench by Governor Larry Hogan in 2019.
Judge Wilkinson is the third state judge shot by a person involved in a case they were presiding over in the last 3 years. This deadly incident shedding light on judicial security. Last year, U.S. Marshals investigated more than 1,300 real and potential threats against protected persons in the federal judiciary. Family and friends remembering remembering Judge Wilkinson as a devoted father and husband who was faithful to his community.
I'm going to remember that he encouraged people and served people. It's not fair.
While Wilkinson's colleagues mourn a judge dedicated to the public good.
He treated everyone with respect in the courtroom. He acted with dignity in all times, and he always made decisions based on intellect and honesty. And it's an example that we all need to follow.
To honor that commitment, in Washington County this week, court is still in session.
Breaking at this hour, a circuit court judge is dead after being shot outside of his Maryland home.
Very quiet here on the street, Old Waterford Drive here. We're in the Clear Spring community, which is maybe about 13, 14 minutes north of Hagerstown. In the driveway right here behind me of this home where that judge was found shot. Now, that was 8 p.m. last night when the call came into the Washington County Sheriff's Department. And when they arrived, we're told that they found the judge, 52-year-old Andrew Wilkinson, in the driveway suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. He was rushed to the hospital but could not be saved. Fox 5 was able to reach Washington County Circuit Court Administrative Judge Brett Wilson, who confirmed the death to us and told us this has been a horrific night. Western Maryland State Delegate Neil Parrott, who is from Hagerstown, posted on X, "Horrible news. Please pray for our police and for Judge Wilkinson's family at this time." We're told that Wilkinson also has a wife and children, and people have been leaving flowers here in the neighborhood this morning, though neighbors are being very quiet and not wanting to speak out publicly. There is still a concern.
We did talk with a neighbor just a short time ago who said they didn't really know the family in that home very well. I asked about other crime in the neighborhood. They said the worst thing we've ever had here was some kids throwing toilet paper on trees as a prank.
Urgent manhunt is expanding for the suspect accused of killing a Maryland state judge. The judge, Andrew Wilkinson, had just awarded full custody of the suspect's 4 children to his ex-wife.
The search expanding for a Maryland father of 4 accused of killing the judge who presided over his divorce hearing.
The U.S. Marshals, their task force is on this, their nationwide search.
Authorities warn the suspect, Pedro Argote, on the run since Thursday, has ties to multiple states, including New York, Florida, Indiana, and North Carolina. A $10,000 reward now offered for his capture. Deputies armed with long guns swarming a wooded area near Williamsport, Maryland on Saturday morning after Argote's silver Mercedes SUV was found by a resident. That car just 15 minutes from where police say Argote gunned down Circuit Court Judge Andrew Wilkinson outside of his home, just hours after the judge awarded Argote's ex-wife full custody of their children.
It could have been there since Thursday night or sometime Friday. We'll pull the computers, GPSs from it.
Officials don't believe Argote is still in the immediate area, though they are urging the public to stay on alert. Argote considered armed and dangerous.
We're just going to be vigilant until we bring him to justice or we capture him.
Tonight, we're learning new details from investigators about how the 2 men knew one another.
And it's giving some insight into a motive here. Our Evan Kozlov has been following this manhunt all day. He joins us live in front of the judge's home. And Evan, we understand the sheriff is calling this a targeted attack.
Was it a targeted attack on Judge Wilkinson? His wife and son were at home at the time.
Just hours earlier, Judge Wilkinson awarded full legal custody of Argote's children to his estranged wife amid a bitter divorce and custody battle. The judge also issued a protective order against Argote based on a history of domestic violence, telling him to stay away from both the children and his estranged wife.
And last year, his ex-wife requested a protective order, but it was dismissed after 2 weeks.
Argote's former divorce attorney, Michael Gast.
Pedro is a very quiet, unassuming person, and I would never have thought he would be capable of doing anything like this.
That attorney, I should note, also knew Judge Wilkinson and called him a beloved member of the community.
Yeah, truly chilling details here. David, what did police say about the gun used in this incident?
They specifically said that the gun was, Argote was a legal gun owner in the state of Maryland, but they declined to offer any additional details about the gun itself.
Explosive new details are emerging about the events leading up to that killing.
Judge Andrew Wilkinson was killed hours after a ruling in a divorce case. Authorities saying the man who lost custody of his kids in that case, Pedro Argote, is their prime suspect. And tonight, new audio recordings obtained by the Associated Press provide new insight into the abuse allegations he was facing in that divorce case. His adult daughter from a previous relationship said she spent most of her teenage years confined to her bedroom. She said Argote had cameras installed throughout the house and was watching my every move. Now, during the emotional testimony, she said, "The reason I worked up the courage to testify was so my siblings would not have to go through the mental torment I currently have." She told the court, explaining that she left home at 18 to escape the abuse and had not had contact with her father since. Judge Wilkinson concluded that Argote was not fit to have custody of his 4 younger children, ages 12, 11, 5, and 3. In the audio recording, Wilkinson said the manner in which Mr. Argote has isolated these children and mom over the past 2 years, I think that has gone throughout the marriage, and it's shocking. I think he is abusive in multiple ways.
Well, Kelsey, this evening we've seen a helicopter circling the area, an armored vehicle going into the woods here, and a heavy police presence pretty much all day. It does seem like they have scaled back the search, at least in this area, for the night. But Sheriff Albert did say earlier that it's just a matter of time before they find him. Saturday, the Washington County Sheriff's Office launched an extensive search for Pedro Argote. Night, deputies focused the search on the area where a resident spotted Argote's silver Mercedes Saturday morning along Bottom Road in Williamsport.
It's a pretty remote area, so it could have been there since Thursday night or sometime Friday.
Multiple law enforcement agencies assisted with the search, including U.S. Marshals. As night fell, crews in tactical gear made their way into the pitch-black woods. The search area is hundreds of acres and includes vacant properties.
It would be really easy to hide out there for a long time if you needed to.
Washington County Sheriff Brian Albert said they're searching the area before doing a thorough search of the vehicle in case Argote is still around. Assistant Mayor of Williamsport, Dennis Grove, said the idea that a fugitive could be hiding nearby is unnerving.
We weren't that concerned about it. I mean, we were, but until today when they found the car just outside of town, and everybody basically is really concerned about where the guy's at. If in fact he killed the judge, then he certainly ain't going to worry about killing somebody else.
We're going to catch this guy. It's just a matter of time. We don't feel that the community's at risk here in Williamsport or the surrounding areas. We just ask that you avoid the search area.
The man accused of killing a Washington County judge is over. Police found Pedro Argote dead.
The Washington County community can breathe a little easier this afternoon. Murder suspect Pedro Argote was located deceased.
Sheriff Albert goes on to say Argote's body will be transferred to the Baltimore County Medical Examiner's Office for an autopsy. We're told details regarding Argote's cause or time of death will not be released until after the autopsy is complete.
I'd like to thank my personnel for their tireless work and dedication during this investigation. Most of us have not slept a good night's sleep since last Thursday.
It was a Maryland State Police team, a search team this morning that came upon his body about a mile from his car, which is not far from the Potomac River and some railroad tracks. Now, the sheriff says that the medical examiner in Baltimore will determine the cause and the time of death, but the sheriff added that right now, the residents here in this area can breathe a big sigh of relief. Take a listen.
It's relief, but it's still a tragedy that we're dealing with. Most of us up here, we just came from Judge Wilkinson's viewing, met with the family. They were very appreciative. It brings a little bit of closure to them, but it's still a tragedy. They lost a husband, a father, and a brother. So, kind of a somber moment for us.
We want to show you video now from Chopper 4 over the area where the sheriff says they found Argote's body. It's near Clear Spring Road and Bottom Road, near some railroad tracks and the river, about a mile from where Argote's silver Mercedes was found last weekend. The sheriff would not say if a weapon was found with the body. He says the search team had been looking in the woods all week and came upon the 49-year-old's body. The sheriff would not say today how investigators knew so soon that Argote was their suspect. suspect in the killing of Judge Andrew Wilkinson, but did say the man had not previously threatened the judge. There is a viewing going on right now here in Hagerstown. Will go on until about 7 o'clock tonight. Tomorrow there will be a funeral for the judge. The sheriff here in Washington County said that they have tightened security for judges in this area.
A somber morning at St. Anne Roman Catholic Church as many filed in to pay their respects to Maryland Circuit Court Judge Andrew Wilkinson.
He, was very compassionate with all his players.
But Henry Foltz knew Wilkinson more as a dedicated coach with the Hagerstown Soccer Club. Foltz adds Wilkinson's involvement extended to other clubs and organizations too.
And he was very involved in the community, and that's one of the things that, was so great about him. He wasn't just involved with soccer.
I am thankful the community has come together. Former state delegate Neil Parrott says with Argote found, it helped give them some closure on the situation. But the pain over Wilkinson's loss, it's still so fresh. I think it does bring some relief, especially to his family. Now the threat's not there, the threat to the community's not there. But it's just a very sad situation.
Jim Ward is a neighbor of the Wilkinson family.
We were all shocked over it. It's a very nice community, kind of close-knit, and a lot of people know a lot of people there, and we were all stunned by it.
Wilkinson is survived by 2 children and his wife Stephanie, who says she is touched by the outpouring of support from the community.
Tony was a good judge, one of few, and we need as many good judges as we can. It's a big loss for the community.
Judge Wilkinson was regarded for his integrity on the bench. He was active in numerous community causes such as the YMCA and Rotary Service Club.
You wouldn't expect that to find that in Hagerstown, but looking at the situation all across the United States, it's not really that uncommon, I guess.
The Washington County Sheriff's Office is working to find better ways to protect judges to prevent this from ever happening again.
Spiritual oppression.
The heartbreakingly harrowing acts that these 2 disgruntled defendants exacted against judicial officials were outright expressive extensions of spiritual oppression. When the spirit is systematically oppressed by commanding figures that lean on the declarations of societal power structures, the spirit itself proceeds to lose its very sense of agency, its sense of autonomy, and its sense of authority over one's very own life trajectory. For systematic oppression exists as the successive suppression of spiritual power, and is in actuality an overarching principality that operatively streams through sordid segments of our collective consciousness. And it tends to attach itself to souls that are traversing through the most vulnerable of spiritual circumstances. Whether that be dementedness that stems from compounded traumatization, deep depression, profound impoverishment, unrelenting helplessness, sheer hopelessness, unwarranted unwantedness, or some other overbearing state of being. No matter the energetic signature that it latches onto, it exists as a perpetual pressure that simultaneously feels inescapable, yet also domineeringly demands relief. An achingly assured relief that involves ensuring that the perceived enforcer of said oppression feels the compounded agony harbored deep within. On the opposing end of the spectrum, for resolution's sake, once the oppressive spirit is acknowledged and understood, the pain, the pressure, and the powerlessness can be transmuted into constructive action if we intensely tap into the untapped reservoir of spiritual energy that no mortal man can taint nor deplete. If we allow the spirit of oppression to overtake us, it shall inevitably break us and endlessly leak unto our interactions, thus lending towards the illimitable transference of trauma. Edge of Tomorrow, Live, Die, Repeat, film reference. In an effort to cinematically contextualize, contending with an overarching consciousness that streams through the lifeblood of inviting entities, let's briefly examine the plot of Edge of Tomorrow, Live, Die, Repeat, wherein the active combat protagonist enters a time loop after being exposed to the bloodstream of an alpha-level opposition that he haphazardly annihilated. Subsequent to communing with a parallel protagonist, he realizes that his mission is to die every day until he defeats the Omega-level opposition. Alphas behave as the higher order group through which the Omega controls subordinate mimics. If an Alpha is terminated, the Omega resets the day and adjusts its tactics until the battle is won. In an attempt to trick the protagonist, the Omega transmits visions through him, ultimately luring him to a disaster that snipes his power to reset the day. However, subsequent to utilizing a specialized serum, he gains access to a true vision of where the Omega is located. Mortally wounded in the process, he manages to defeat the Omega, which respectively destroys the entirety of the opposition, including every extension linked to the main source. The day then begins anew, and his seemingly impossible mission is made possible.